Now we switch to an explosive debate over immigration reform, from new legislation in Arizona to possible congressional action to protests over the weekend. The topic is back in the spotlight. We're going to sift through some of the complexities with Clarissa Martinez with the National Council of Raza and Dan Stein with the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Dan, well, to both of you this question, but I'll start with you, Dan, which is tell us the most important part of this debate now. We have what's happening in Arizona. We have talk of an immigration bill here in Washington. What should our viewers be focused on?
That's a good question, but I think the focus needs to be on an emerging national debate about interior immigration law enforcement. Fundamentally, the disagreement at the federal level that a lot of Americans have with the priorities of the administration and the disagreements that seem to be going on among those who oppose the Arizona law is essentially over whether we're going to enforce immigration law in the interior and how it's going to be done. Is there going to be, as we believe, a full federal-state partnership whereby the federal government does its job working with the states, and the states consistently with federal law while protecting civil rights also ensure that people in the state are here legally in compliance with, of course, the federal government procedures. The effort in Congress to push what many of us believe is an amnesty bill overlooks what we feel are the fundamental structural needs for reform. And Arizona is trying to respond to the absence of those requirements.
Your view, Clarissa, where is this debate and what should people be focused on?
I think that the developments, particularly over the last couple of weeks, have really brought to the national consciousness the state of crisis that our immigration system is in, and that there is a legitimate concern among all Americans that it needs to be fixed. I don't think we have seen the level of leadership needed from the White House to address this problem. And I frankly think that it's very clear to everybody that Republicans are going to have to step up and step in to work with Democrats to solve this problem. The solution, and I think that's what Arizona clearly shows, is that we need a comprehensive federal solution that deals with the factors that are feeding illegality. We have a legal system that's not working, which means that people then go around it rather than through it, through legal channels. And I think that last week on Thursday, the Democrats put together a very credible, strong platform that has many of the ideas that Republicans have been talking about, but creates this layer effect where we're going to be strengthening the border, strengthening workforce enforcement, so we shut down the jobs magnet. But at the same time, we can't ignore, if we really want to restore the rule of law, that there are people living and contributing, and we need a system that requires them to come forward, pay taxes, and levels the playing field.
So you're both talking about a national approach to this. I want to ask you, Dan, about the Arizona law. Is that something that should be overwhelmed by a national piece of legislation? Is it a model to be built on? How does that play in this larger immigration?
Well, the Arizona bill, and most of it's not particularly controversial. The one section dealing with police, checking verification after a lawful stop is obviously the issue. But ultimately, Arizona is a framework which needs to be built on, both in the states and at the federal level, to have an overarching federal reform that actually enforces immigration law in the interior with the states.
But on that,
the federal proposal that we're seeing the Democrats come out with, ultimately, we're not sure that's even a consensus proposal among Democrats, much less among Republicans. When both candidates campaigned, Obama and McCain, they said that we needed to restore credibility first, get the borders under control first before we did anything else. There seems to be a departure from that promise during the campaign to now to push a bill at the federal level which would create amnesty for people here illegally without really reforming the laws that we think needs to be done.
Let me ask you a question about that Arizona bill. You said, well, there's not much of it's controversial, but you're talking about law enforcement. At the point of contact on law enforcement is where it is quite controversial. And,
that's right.
And it's it may be warping the debate, but it's controlling the debate. And so what's your view just on the question that people are being considered suspects based on simply the color of their skin?
Well, we at FAIR are as concerned as anyone else to ensure that there's no racial profiling done at the state level in any context. It's very important that there be civil rights protections built in, and we think this bill, particularly now that it's been even amended further, does that. But I think it would be important for everyone to calm down for a little while. Let's see how the law is actually going to be implemented before everybody goes berserk. The effort is ultimately to try to protect public safety, citizens citizens of Arizona and to recruit the federal government as a partner in verifying status.
Clarissa, you're shaking.
Very straightforward.
You're shaking your head, and so respond. But let me ask you also this question, which is, surely there does have to be some law enforcement component. So supporters of this law or of strong law enforcement would say, don't define the whole thing by the most egregious possible way you could take this law. So what's your response to that?
That piece is what the law is about. And I think that one of the interesting things is that when you hear law enforcement, you see that they're deeply divided on this issue. And actually, there's been a lot of the sheriffs and jurisdictions along the border who are saying, look, our crime rate's it has gone down over the last decade. We know that there are problems. But if you have a law where you're asking law enforcement to, under reasonable suspicion, stop people for whatever that is, the governor couldn't define it, the law doesn't define it, as opposed to for their criminal behavior, then you're dispersing law enforcement resources. And I think that is one of the reasons that there's this division among law enforcement about the outsourcing of federal immigration enforcement in their hands rather than focus on criminal activity, which is what people in Arizona are really and deeply concerned about.
As a final question to both of you, I want you to play political prognosticator a little bit here, because this larger debate about immigration is taking place in the context of a political year. The president himself has said he's not sure lawmakers have an appetite for it. And so I want to ask you first, Dan, what is your sense of whether anything's actually going to happen on this issue? And if anything isn't going to happen, where does the pressure come from?
Well, nothing's going to happen at the federal level because there isn't a consensus on a variety of the core structural issues that need reform. What's the purpose of immigration law? Immigration generally, how do we make it better serve other national interests, our labor market, environmental policy, a whole range of other things we need to have. We need to really resolve this issue of the federal-state partnership, which Arizona is ultimately about. That's not going to get resolved at the federal level at this point. The underlying factors that are fueling the continued growth in public anxiety about immigration are only going to get worse as the structural nature of the economy changes, the prospects for Americans living the American dream change in this new globalized competitive environment. Our immigration policies are somewhere stuck back in the 1820s. They don't represent what the country needs today. And as long as that's the case, and as long as immigration continues to cost taxpayers far more than it's actually benefiting the country, you're going to have this growing public anxiety.
Clarissa, your thoughts on the political atmosphere?
I would agree with you that, I think we're seeing Congress largely not have the appetite to do a lot of things. But I think what we're hearing from the American public is, look, if we're battling foreclosure, unemployment, and a myriad other problems, the least we can expect from our elected leaders is to be able to do more than one thing at once. And I think this has really taken the issue to the national crisis that it is. And it's going to force the president to exercise leadership, and it's going to force members of both parties to come together and work on a solution, because right now we have had a lot of rhetoric, a lot of politics, a lot of false choices, a lot of finger pointing, not a lot of problem solving.
Well, then let me, I'll build on that point, and this will now be the final question to both of you. Quickly, is there any area, is there a center place where the two of you could agree on something that could be the building block for this kind of national immigration policy? Is there anywhere you...
Well, I won't speak for my friend, colleague, but we both seem to agree on the need for border enforcement, and we both seem to believe in employer sanctions, fundamentally, that's important. We both seem to believe that fundamental respect for human rights and human dignity needs to prevail in all government actions dealing with everybody, including immigrants, people from other countries. Even people here illegally are fundamentally entitled to basic respect, fundamental human rights and dignity. Where we disagree seems to be on things like chain migration, amnesty programs. What are the priorities? Are we going to give people a priority if they jumped in line ahead of people who respected the law? And why this issue is tearing the American people apart is fundamentally in a highly diverse society where respect for law is a cornerstone of citizenship. One side is saying there's a group of people who don't really have to play by the rules, and everybody else does. And as long as that continues to be dominating and leading the public debate, we're not going to get to constructive solutions.
Clarissa, the last word goes to you.
I think where we disagree is that some of us are actually trying to do something to get the solution on the table, where Mr. Stein's group has a long history of simply trying to block reform. And I think that the American public is saying, this is the time. We need a legal system that works so we can reduce illegality, and we need border solutions, and we need employment solutions. We need to level the playing field so that we don't have unscrupulous employers pitting U.S. workers against vulnerable immigrant workers. But some of us are actually actively working on delivering a solution and getting Congress and the White House to do so, and some others are unfortunately just blocking it.
Okay, well, we'll be able to come back to this debate. Clarissa Martinez, thanks very much. Dan Stein, thank you very much.